Well, it's my absolute pleasure to be interviewing Professor Andrew Monnickendam. Andrew is Professor of English Literature in the Department of English and German Studies. And what I'd like to do in this conversation, basically, Andrew, is to review your years in the faculty and in the department, and just ask you about your experiences. So maybe we could begin at the beginning, as they say. When did you join the faculty?
I joined the faculty in 1984. I joined the university in 1984. Mm-hmm. I spent 3 years at the School of Translation, and then I moved here in 1987. Mm-hmm. So joining the university in 1984 is an easy year to remember.
Yes, it certainly is.
Yeah.
And the School of Translation was then down in medical faculty, I think, is that right?
No.
Oh, it was somewhere else.
It was at the bottom of the valley, if you like, where sociology and...
Okay, and then it moved up to medicine.
Yeah, that's right.
Yes, that's right. Okay. So you came here, let's say, in the early 80s, and of course things have changed everywhere a lot since then. What was your initial impression of the university, of the faculty? I mean, it's very different from... You were at the University of Essex.
Yeah, that's right.
Or was it so different from Essex?
Certainly in terms of size, certainly in terms of demand. There were a lot more... It was a lot more oriented towards being in class many hours a week. And it was a very large place. It had a very poor library, for example, but in other ways, it was an interesting place.
Yeah. And what were you teaching in those days? Well, being at the bottom of the ladder, on the bottom rung, Literature 1 twice a year in the first year, Literature 1 twice in the next year, and then after 3 or 4 years I was able to branch out a little bit, but very hierarchical. Mm-hmm, yeah. Maybe it still is, I'm not sure. Well, that's a different question. And you did your doctorate with the department then?
I did, yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Had you come with expectations of what you wanted to do, or did they kind of grow organically?
No. Well, I think I started like most, or like many people have, giving English classes either to individuals or in language schools. And then I spent 7 years in a secondary school, and then decided that I wanted something that was intellectually more stimulating, though obviously not necessarily easier or better in any sense at all, but something different that suited my own, I suppose, curiosity.
Yes, yeah. I mean, I suppose an obvious question, but one that's worth asking anyway, is because it's inevitably the thing that people talk about, the then and now with the students. And we have perhaps a romantic idea that students were more academically competent in the past, that they read more, that they did more homework, that they paid more attention, that they were more respectful. And I'm sure, my own lecturers would have said that about my predecessors too. Do you think that's inevitably the sort of generational issue, or is there some truth in that?
Well, 40 years is a long time.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously generational issues are certainly there. But I think there are changes which are very sort of obvious, and perhaps too obvious to be stated, but they have to be. I think the profile of the student we have now has changed a lot. I think previously they read a lot more, and subsequently their written English, in our particular case, was much better, and their spoken English was much poorer. I think now the situation has changed. The spoken English is vastly superior to what it was, and the written English, as we know, accompanying the lack of interest and time dedicated to reading, has clearly deteriorated.
Yeah, and that's a social problem, really, though, isn't it? It's not restricted to English studies.
No, certainly not. It affects all university degrees in which writing plays an important role, which presumably in the humanities should be all of them, I suppose.
Yes, yeah. I mean, going back to the early days, now in a few moments perhaps we can talk about some of the challenges that we face now in university teaching, I mean, particularly artificial intelligence and things like that, things that were unimaginable 40 years ago. What were the difficulties that you faced then?
Well, a very basic one, access to books in a foreign language, and a very small library. That was a big challenge, I suppose the biggest one of all.
Yeah.
But there are also other sort of challenges, if you like, more to do with university politics, which are still around, I think.
Yeah.
And in particular, what other people thought the role of an English department should be in a Faculty of Humanities.
Right.
I think everyone accepted that English had become a lingua franca, which is an interesting, not very English expression.
Yeah.
But whether it was able to compete at the same level in fields of literature and linguistics, I think that was very much an idea which did not have many followers outside our own department.
Right.
I think perhaps it's still there dormant in some corner of the collective mind that an English department teaches English and that's it.
Instrumentally.
Instrumentally,
Yeah.
yes, as something practical.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know to what extent this has been sort of left behind, or whether it's still sort of dormant in some sort of hidden recess of people's minds. I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, I remember from my own university in my undergraduate days, the departments of French and German and Italian seemed to us to be very exotic. And I'm not sure if that's still the case. Was that the case for English 40 years ago?
No, I don't think so, no. Exotic, I don't think so, no. Maybe a bit of an upstart or an intruder, but...
Yes, but not exotic.
Not exotic,
not exotic.
No.
Okay. And the department itself, 40 years ago, I mean, was obviously a lot smaller. How did it feel to you as a newcomer coming into it?
I don't think it was smaller. Well, obviously, I came in just as student numbers began to rise spectacularly, from being something which was basically a family in which there were sort of 20 graduates a year. In a couple of years, it changed into a situation where, for example, students queued overnight in order to get a place in the optional subjects they wanted, something which I think is unbelievable. Well, that's what happened. They formed a system of Russian queuing and stayed overnight. The early classes were very large. I think one year I had a class of 118, but that was it. That was how it was.
Yes.
But I think the student, as we've talked about, change had a rather different system in which the early years where everything was compulsory and the last years was virtually freedom. And I think this inspired us a lot as well, because in the fourth and fifth years, as they were then,
yes, that's right.
We could introduce new optional subjects at will, and people did so every year without the need of it going to this committee and that through the department and through that meeting and this person and the other. So in that sense, there was a sort of greater sense of freedom, I think, academically.
Yes. It's sometimes said about students that over the years that they're not unlike children, in the sense that their relationship with their parents, compared to, for example, our generation, is significantly different. And we had, I'm sure, very good relationships with our parents, but they were more formal. They were more based on a sense of respect and a sense of place. And I think now of my own children with whom I have a very, very direct relationship, but I don't think the word respect would, in the old-fashioned sense, would necessarily be top of the list. Do you think that's happened with students?
Not really, because I think one of the things that has not changed very much is that students are very teacher dependent, in the sense that there is still this belief that you have to say what the teacher demands. But At the same time, I think it's certainly true that many more students in this country still live at home, which is something that visiting students remark on when they visit our campus. But at the same time, many of them work in order to pay for their studies, so their sort of view on the economics of life is perhaps much more mature than ours, living on a grant and having no particular worry financially.
Yes,
so I think that, you know, on the one hand it's true, they live at home, on the other hand they have a knowledge of economics which perhaps we didn't have.
Yes,
how life works,
exactly.
The big picture.
Speaking about foreign students, one very important aspect of your own professional experience over the years has been internationalization.
Sure.
I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about your sort of view on what you've achieved and what there might still be left to be done in that area.
Well, it's a very big issue what internationalization means, but I think a university has always to balance two rather different aspects. One of them is its sense of place, and the other is internationalization. We all know the sense of place. It's in the university's name, it's in its location, it's on a campus near but not in Barcelona, as some people find out too late. It's near the sea, it's in Catalonia and whatever, and we all know this. And this is, of course, part of its identity. As to internationalization, well, this is the other aspect of it. It has to balance this sense of place with the idea that knowledge is to a certain extent universal. And the idea of the university in Western Europe goes back to the sort of 11th and 12th century when these ideas, or perhaps utopian ideas of knowledge appear. I think the university we both work at present has a very clear sense of internationalization, but in a rather sort of idiosyncratic way. It has many programs. It has always shown an interest in international affairs. We had an Erasmus office long before other universities did. But all these programs, for example, the program with refugees, the idea of solidarity, and etc., they're all to a certain sense tangential to the central sort of idea of what a university is. So they're all, in my view, very important, but they're to a certain extent additions. If a university was really international, you could perhaps take a survey and say, well, in order to be international, I expect there to be more or less 5% of the staff, or 10%, it doesn't really matter, who are international. But outside the special cases like our own of foreign languages, I think you'll find that 5% is not the case at all. So I don't think that there has been that the staff, from the point of view of the staff, the way the staff is made up is international at all. It's still very much the old model. At the same time, I think there's also a strong resistance to internationalization, and we saw this in great detail when there was this issue that everyone talked about with a foreign identity name, Bologna. And we heard all these discussions about 3 + 2 and 4 + 1 + 1 and 3 + 1 + 1 and a whole sort of nonsensical debate about this. But in the end, nothing happened. All countries in Europe went down 3 + 2 and we stayed with 4 + 1. There might have been good reasons for it, but it's not really compatible with the idea of internationalization. What we have achieved, not simply myself, is of course that I think it's a simple and therefore important idea, is that Erasmus forms part of a student's expectations, and it's become normalized. That, I think, to me is the most positive outcome of the idea of internationalization.
At this stage of your career, I think it's right and proper that you look back on things that you've done that you're particularly proud about.
Yeah.
In terms of internationalisation, I mean, you've been involved in lots of programmes and agreements. Is there any one particular one that stands out for you?
Well, I think there are two. One, as I said, is that we had, or we set up an enormous number of Erasmus agreements in the faculty, and I think this is very positive. Mm-hmm. I think at one time we had about 120 students on exchanges out and about 180 in, but I can't remember the numbers. Mm-hmm. And the second one is the more recent one, which is the setting up of a double diploma MA, which has been a long and arduous process, but I think it's something which is very positive, as it's something in English studies in Spain completely unique. No one else has anything like it.
Yeah. Talking about looking back on things with a sense of pride and moving the conversation more into the academic arena. Sure. Now, what do you feel about your particular contribution to the academic world, and how would you? I mean, those are terrible questions to ask.
Terrible questions.
It's like asking somebody to pin a medal on themselves. But I mean, this is obviously the question that we need to ask at this stage.
Well, I think that some people like using terms like legacy and what you leave behind, but I think these ideas have two sort of extreme components. One of them are geniuses like Mozart who have legacies, and the other are people like Don Corleone who also wants a legacy, and I don't think we should follow that path either. I think if we leave anything behind, it is basically two things. One of them is the students who we've had the honour to supervise at PhD level. Mm-hmm. They are the sort of the thing that we've really produced. Mm-hmm. And I think also an occasional article or publication, not the latest one, which appears in the most sort of highly rated A+ whatever journal there is, but one which is still read in 5 or 10 years' time. Yes. I think that's the only important things that we leave behind. Yes. And I think to say more on that subject is really to be rather sort of be involved in an exercise of vanity, yes. Which I would try and avoid.
I completely understand that. And now looking towards the future, how do you envisage, from a position of considerable perspective, the future of the department? Well,
I think I have absolute confidence in the department and the younger members of staff to adapt to whatever circumstances there are and the new challenges that arise. I mean, quite often these new challenges are categorized as threats or menaces or whatever, but they're simply challenges, and we have to be Darwinian and adapt to them and survive.
And extending that to the faculty and to the university?
Well, I think there are two things that it basically has to decide on. One of them is to what extent, as the thing you mentioned, artificial intelligence, to what extent that is really what we're going to do with this. There seem to be two extreme views of it. One of them is that it's going to destroy everything and everything will change and nothing will be the same again. And the other one is to say, well, let's be creative and innovative and introduce it into our curriculum and make life happier. But I don't think either extreme is going to be the case. I think we simply have to take it seriously now, and I think that many people and many departments don't take it seriously because they can't move out of this kind of emotional idea that it's either all good or all bad, and it's neither. So I think that's one thing. And secondly, the question of what a university is. I was thinking about this, you could put this in a very simple question. If someone came up to you and said, "Oh, what do you do?" You say, "Well, I'm a university professor, blah, 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 blah." And they say, "Are you an intellectual?" Now, I was thinking, well, is that meant to be a compliment, or is this meant to mean something rather different? You're sort of out of touch with reality or whatever. And I think that this is an enormous challenge to the current university. What is an intellectual means what is the nature of knowledge, and what is the value of knowledge in a very kind of commercial way.
Yeah.
So I think that is something that has to be looked at, because with this continuing emphasis on the student and what the student should do and how they should design their curriculum and how they should follow and how they should do things together, I think at certain moments we're losing sight of what should be the aspirational model for university education. And then if we don't know what that aspirational model is, we're in serious problems. It causes us no doubt, if we are talking about engineering or dentistry or medicine, what the aspirational model is, but we seem to doubt very much what the aspirational model is in the humanities, and this seems to me to be an enormous sort of challenge.
Yes, absolutely. And speaking of the humanities, I mean, how do you envisage the future of humanities in our society? I mean, there are doomsayers everywhere now telling us that the humanities are over, basically.
Well, I don't think they're over at all. We have in the Faculty a Classics department, and 30, 40 years ago they said the same thing, that was the end, that they were, without trying to be or without offending anyone, that they were living sort of like dinosaurs. And as we know, Harold Bloom said the same thing about English departments, that they were sort of on the way out. But I think the question is adaptation, and trying basically to adapt ourselves to a society in which reading doesn't extend as far as it used to. That's not to say that people don't read, but the number of people who read intensively has clearly diminished. Yeah. Right? I mean, that's to say, we can't simply teach to 5% of our graduates. We have to think about the middle class, to use a very sort of loaded term.
Yes, yeah. So adaptation is key.
Sure, I think so, yeah.
Absolutely, yeah. And finally, bringing it back into the personal ambit, what about your own future? What are your plans?
My own future? Does one have one after? Yeah, I suppose so.
Of course you do.
Sure. Well, I come, as some of you know, from a family of centenarians, so I'll be around, not necessarily on campus, hopefully for some time. Well, I've always liked travelling. That's always been restricted for two particular reasons. One of them is having to travel during school holiday times, which is not a very pleasant experience at times, and for familiar reasons as well. So I shall spend some time travelling, and next stop in the beginning of 2025, I'll be off to Southeast Asia for a couple of months. And that, I think, I hope, is the first of several trips of that sort. But also, I suppose, again, it's a challenge, right? It's I've been working full-time for 48 years, and being brought up in a family business. I suppose you've been working practically all your life.
All your life, yes.
So it'll be something completely different.
And in fact, you're not giving up working, are you? Because you're continuing your involvement with the department.
Well, I hope so, yes. Well, I've applied to the Emeritus Programme, and hopefully I will be accepted. And if that's the case, then I will, with pleasure, continue doing work and cooperating with the department in anything that they require.
Wonderful. So it's actually not goodbye, it's see you next year.
Well, next September, yes.
Yes. Okay. Andrew Monnickendam, as always, a great pleasure. Thank you very much.
Thank you, David. Thank you very much.